Yeah, booyaka.
Brah.
Hey, man, you know what? I
What?
gotta get with YouTube, man. They supposed to be giving me some bread for ad revenue, man. I haven't got that check yet, man. What they doing? You know what I'm saying? Haven't seen it. Have you seen
You getting
it?
checks from YouTube? Let me find out,
You're
man.
supposed to. I mean, it's chump change, man. I ain't Bruce Line in them. You know what
Just
I'm
messing
saying?
with you, man.
We ain't got that fan base, but you know we on our way. We back to the grill again. The grill again. Back
Yes,
to the
sir.
grill again. The grill again. Ladies and gentlemen, season 5. What is this, episode 25?
25. bro.
25, man. A quarter of a century out this joint, man.
Yes, sir.
We
Good
here, man. We're
season.
gonna get into a crazy topic today, bro. We're gonna get into a crazy topic today. So we're gonna jump right in. We've been talking about some wild stuff as it relates to dreams, nightmares, all that kind of stuff. It's the kind of topic where if you go on YouTube, you will find a ton of people that have Christian, non-Christian, and we looked at both. I looked at the Christian, how Christians process it, non-Christians, but this idea of dreams, nightmares, demonic possession, all of that stuff. Like it's really, you know how the YouTube algorithm is. If you go watch a video, it's going to send you 15,000 videos
Easy.
to consider of that topic, right?
Alice in Wonderland.
Right, it really is. But this idea of dreams, nightmares, and possession. So in the culture at large, as of right now, because of the elevation of things like witchcraft, Wicca, there's been a lot more, satanic, bold satanic proclamations. Not talking about some people just worship Satan by default, but like on some like hail Satan type,
Yeah, I saw a John today. A shirt said, "Not today, Jesus," and it had a
Right.
Baphomet. You know what I'm saying? With
Right,
the rainbow
100%,
all over. I was like,
100%.
"What the world?"
Yeah, I mean it's really have you seen the movie Nefarious?
I haven't seen it yet. Yeah, I saw the preview
Bro,
for
I
that.
should have told you, peep that joint for the. But it's Nefarious. I would say. So I heard reviews about it before I saw it. And I heard mixed reviews, and I've seen it now a couple of times because different people in my church wanted to watch it, and I think it's a good spiritual warfare movie. It doesn't have the Hollywood where the demonic power is so powerful. It's just unreasonable. I feel like from the time in my interactions with spiritual warfare, particularly casting demons out of people, it was more like that movie. It was more like on that level. But I thought just a lot of things are coming to a head now, where I think in our culture we're for the one of the first times inundated. Not that these things haven't always existed, but I think we're kind of inundated now with sort of the cosmic powers of darkness, as Paul describes them in Ephesians 6, right?
Yeah.
There's a sense where that is just a crazy reality and what's happening now. And a lot of believers are kind of taken aback, and the boldness of it is really phenomenal. But today we
people
want to talk a
tapping
little
in.
bit about it, huh?
People tapping into the spirit realm, man.
They
That's
are,
what's
man.
happening.
Like it's
Yeah.
becoming more. The occult is on the rise.
right.
All this stuff is on the things that we've known for a long time. But I think there. You know how they say like, oh, the devil and the demons, they're like the darkness, right?
Right.
Boy, 2 Corinthians 11 says that Satan appears as an angel of light, and I would say that Satan is appearing in the light. Like it's that bold. He's that bold, and people are so dark, right? They're like even in the light, in the daytime, it's appearing. So we're going to talk about this concept. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, if you think about it, we're not, much different, right? As it pertains to sin and pride.
Sure.
When somebody starts giving us attention, what do? We puff up a little bit. We act
Right.
a little bit more. You know what I'm saying? So right now, with the spirit realm getting so much attention, you could see it's time to show off kind of mentality. It's that's what we're facing. That's what it seems like.
Yeah. Nah, I mean, I think we're there, and I think believers have to stop playing and realize this is where we're at. We're in the new normal. Like we're not the old normal. If you're a post millennial, man, I feel for you, because right now you're a ways away from seeing your eschatology come to fruition, because right now it's not that way. All right, so let's let's get into this, man. It's a lot we're going to talk about and do this. But let me first start off with this. As it pertains to, we're going to mostly talk about nightmares. So dreams and nightmares are sort of used synonymously in the way people talk about them, because nightmares are a form of dreams, but we're going to focus more on the nightmare side of it and not just dreams. Dreams are, I mean, one distinction between a dream and a nightmare is that most of the dreams that people remember, what they remember from when they slept, are usually nightmares. Like you'll remember bits and pieces of a dream. Most dreams are like the ones you can remember. Again, don't get me wrong. Don't be like, well, I remember all my dreams. Good for you. There's always that person. I remember all my dreams since I was 5. Good for you, friend. Write a book and maybe it'll turn to a manuscript for a movie, right? But most people only remember like bits and pieces of their dreams, right? It's kind of like it's like being on drugs or something and trying to remember what happened last night. I remember the first time I took shrooms, bro. Man, that night was crazy, and I remember bits and pieces of that joint. Like I just remember,
imagine.
especially because the first time I took shrooms, I was in Boston. My man, I was staying with my man, so we had shroom, and so we took them, and then when they kicked in, it was just wild, and so it was wild about stuff like that. It's like because it wasn't a synthetic, it wasn't synthetic. Shrooms are just straight out of the ground. It didn't. I kind of knew that my mind was still there. I kind of knew it was wild. I wasn't so far gone like I'm on PCP because that's such a chemical, right? Like I knew I was gone, but it was just the way things were being seen and perceived. It was kind of like trying to remember everything that happened. That's kind of how dreams are. But nightmares,
Are you there?
Well, wasn't that crazy? It. Wow, that was crazy, bro. That was ridiculous right there. What just happened? That just happened. I'm not even going to say it was an attack. All right. So I don't know what happened, but we were. So I got the notification from the people that handle our electricity, and they said that this stuff was out, and they said our electricity was out, but I thought it was already out. So when I came back home, it was fine. So I don't know, and all of a sudden, right when I was talking, it just went out. So I don't know. Strack will be back in a second. That's pretty funny, fam. That's pretty good. Well, I apologize. Act of God or the devil, right? So nothing I could do about that. All right, so I'm gonna wait. Give it a second. Wait for the Wolverine to come back. That was pretty interesting. The timing of it was. Now I'm not one of those people who over spiritualize everything, right? I don't like to do that. I don't over spiritualize everything, but it's kind of funny that happened. So let me let Strack know. So it's just kind of interesting. Well, thank you for. I don't know what Strack was talking about when I was gone. I just know all of a sudden I was just like, yeah, man. So the devil, and that joint just went out. But you know, I will not be defeated. No weapon formed against me shall prosper. Even if the weapon is electricity or lack of Wi-Fi in this joint. I felt like I was at the Apollo Theater and Sandman Sims just yanked me off the stage. Y'all don't know. Beat your chest if you know who Sandman Sims is, man. Y'all don't know about that. All right, we're going to get back into this dreams, man. Nightmares and demonic possession. Now I'm really going to talk about it. Now I'm fired up. You know what I'm saying? I was a little bit more laid back, but I'm fired up right now. So we're going to get back into it, you know. The enemy was trying to do it, boy.
Wow, that was crazy.
That was crazy. I don't know how it looked to you, but like our electricity just went out, bro.
Well, I mean, everything just froze. So, you know, most times my first reaction is like, yo, what'd you do, Kurt? And then it ends up being me. So I just was like, this is probably me. Let me sit down and just wait and see what happens.
Where did they get a load of me? Nah, this wasn't you, bro. This was 100% the enemy. It's like I don't know what happened. Now we had a big thunderstorm here earlier, and so earlier my electricity went out, flickered, and then when I was in the office, it went out, and it doesn't even usually go out at the church. But anyway, let's get back where we at, man. I apologize for those of you watching it. You're just gonna have to fast forward that 5 minutes or whatever it was in the retweet. But let's get it, baby. Let's get it. All right. So when it comes to nightmares, I don't know about you, but I had a love for. Did you ever see the Nightmare on Elm Street movies?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
definitely,
bro. Nightmare Part 1 and Part 3, killer. The rest of them were pretty dumb to me, but Dream Warriors, that joint was tough, bro. But what I liked as a kid, with about nightmares and the whole thing was that there's always something mysterious about the subconscious, right? And nightmares and stuff like that. And even though I think a lot of Christians try to act like, you know, like I was saying earlier, we could go on here, find multiple videos, right? We could find tons of videos of people talking with a level of authority about dreams and nightmares and how to process them. But if we're being honest, which we'll see a little bit later on in this episode, the Bible is not that clear on that kind of stuff. Like normally when there's dreams and visions and stuff, it's usually directly connected to something that God is doing in people for a particular purpose, right?
Right.
The Bible does not highlight as authoritatively as people like to pretend a knowledge of what the reality of dreams are and all of this stuff, right? It just doesn't do it. So my affinity for it comes from Nightmare on Elm Street. Like I loved it, and I thought, what a good sort of villain, right? To come in your dreams where you're the most vulnerable, You're the most subconscious, right? You're the most, I don't know if people know this, but when you're dreaming, your brain puts your body into a psychosis, right? So when you're dreaming, your brain tells the rest of your body to be still, because if it doesn't do that, if your brain doesn't put your body into a psychosis, then every one of us will act out what we're doing in our dreams. So you'll get up and walk around, you'll do stuff. This is why when someone like is sleepwalking, right? When someone's, that's typically there's something wrong with the way the brain is being able to tell the body to freeze. So that's why sleepwalking is so odd, because it's actually a real problem where your brain, part of your body, and you're not, it's not connecting. The actual the transmission isn't getting there, right? So you're in this state of psychosis. The only thing that's moving when you're in deep sleep is your eyelids. Eyes. That's why they call it REM, rapid eye movement. Mm-hmm. So your eyes are the only thing. When you're in a deep sleep, your eyes are just moving back and forth, and the rest of your body is just still. And then when you wake up, obviously, the brain is an incredible thing. So the reality of nightmares is something that plagues a ton of people, but it's not as thoroughly understood as people like to make it. So for us, I want to start with because we're going to talk about nightmares mostly. And then we're going to connect it to demonic possession and sort of what are people thinking about nightmares and demonic possession. So to re-kick this off, what's the last nightmare you remember having? What was your last nightmare?
I don't remember a last nightmare specifically, but I know a lot of my nightmares have been surrounding me doing like sin. You know what I'm saying? Like sinning and falling. You know, like a grievous sin. Like I remember having those for sure. So yeah, aside from that, I really don't. I know I've recently dealt with my grandson having nightmares of a long-legged creature chasing after him, and I asked him, to describe the creature, and he just said he just has long legs. So of course, I told him to pray, trust in Jesus, and Jesus will give you big muscles in your dream to deal with what you got to deal with. If you call out in the name of Jesus, you will overcome, and you will be much stronger. So we prayed, and the next night he didn't have the dream. So praise God. But that's the closest I've been to it. I remember Flora used to have some serious nightmares as well. Where they involved, it caused her to feel different. You know what I'm saying? And think different. Like things happened in the dreams that were just, they had a longer term effect on her mentally. That we had to discuss and pray through those things. And yeah, there's been some serious. I've had those encounters. I remember as a child having sleep paralysis. Where I would wake up trying to speak and couldn't speak. So there was definitely times like that as a child where I would see. Actually, I think we might have talked about it on the show before, but I remember seeing my walls spin as a child. And it would be like almost like the hypnosis spin, when somebody's trying to hypnotize someone. Right, and that's what my wall would look like spinning next to me. And I would run to my parents and let them know. And I swore I was seeing what I was seeing as a child. I remember also having a heightened sensitivity to the spirit realm as a child. So like I remember being in fear of God if I laid face up and went to sleep. Like I thought really? I thought the Lord would crush me. I needed to turn around so I couldn't see, and lay face down. So
hold on. So let me understand. So you're saying you were afraid that the Lord would,
as a child,
that the Lord would harm you if you slept on your back facing up?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things where I don't know why I feared that, but there was, like I said, there was a heightened sensitivity to the spirit realm. I remember praying for things specifically that wound up coming true years down the road, like for my son. I wanted to have a son. I was 10 years old praying for a little boy. And my son was born before my grandmother died, as I prayed in detail. So yeah, those types of things would happen on a regular basis. Yeah, it was crazy. It's crazy. And my cousins would have wild dreams as well. And there was stuff going on. Of course, if you've heard any of my music, you've probably heard some of my
Right,
testimonies,
yeah.
some of this. So there was a lot of stuff happening amongst, the youth in my family. So there was, different encounters that we were having. Some were seeing like UFO type experiences. Some would see demonic presence like spinning on a fan in their bedroom,
Right. Wow,
things
that's
like
crazy.
that. Yeah. Oh yeah. There was a lot of wild, wild type nightmares and visions and things like that were happening when I was growing up for sure.
Wow, bro. Now, I think it's interesting, man. I think a lot of times just dreams that aren't nightmares are usually the most forgettable, and the ones that I said, they just kind of, you remember certain things, and sometimes you remember like, but they just usually don't make the most sense. But for some
Right.
reasons, nightmares make sense, right? There's something about, like, dreams are usually, well, like, yeah, I feel like I was talking, and I saw you, Kurt, you were there, and you were walking a three-legged dog. When you're talking about like dreams, they can just be like,
Right.
what is going? But nightmares seem to be more focused and more, they have more of a theme and a thread, and we usually remember them in greater detail. Like
You think that's
said,
because there's someone else involved when it comes to nightmares? You think that may play a part?
and we'll get to that. I think
Yeah.
it's possible, but I think because nightmares by default are more frightening and terrorizing,
They leave more of an impact.
They have more of an impact, right? Because I think, I don't know how many times people think about how much the neurobiological categories, but you have, when you're afraid, you have really the amygdala and the hippocampus, right? Those are the things, and even the prefrontal cortex. Like, your amygdala is the fear part of your brain that kind of kicks in, and it tells you like to be afraid. It gives you a heightened sense of fear. Like, all of a sudden your pupils dilate when you're afraid. It lets you know that danger is present, and then so I think because fear is such a strong negative often emotion, that when we have them in dreams, I mean, if you think about when we're dreaming, it really is, and we're going to look at some quotes from some people, but nightmares are essentially like a subconscious visual trauma. That's what nightmares essentially are. They're like a subconscious visual trauma. So like you're seeing things, you're experiencing things, they're in your subconscious, and for the most part, you're in a psychosis state where you can't do anything about it but experience it. There are moments when you can react in your dreams, and there are times I've actually knew I was dreaming and took control of a situation. There are times I remember thinking this is a dream, and I acted that way.
I've been John Wick in my dreams before John Wick existed.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like rocking everybody.
Right. So
Turn a nightmare to a dream real quick. It's happening.
right. Nah, it's real. So I think there is a part of dreams where when you're able to, like, if you're able to access control, but nightmares are basically a subconscious visual trauma, and you end up having to deal with, be a part of, be involved in something that in the conscious you wouldn't.
Right.
You wouldn't in your rational conscious mind do, but in the subconscious you're killing someone, being killed. There's some type of thing that rivals what that is. We'll talk about what people think is going on. I wouldn't say over the course of my life I've had a ton of like nightmares. I've had a few, and I remember them. I remember some of the more vivid dreams. I think one of the nightmares that I had over the last couple of years that I remember the most is I remember being in like this almost like this warehouse type building, and someone was guiding me through it, even though I don't remember seeing them, but I remember walking past the door and then looking inside, and it was like a square window, like a typical maybe 6x9, bigger than that, maybe 8, maybe about the size of a paper, 8.5 by 11 size window. It was a pretty strong door, and I looked in the window and I saw all of these what looked like dolls, puppets, things like that, but I knew that they were demons. I knew that. I knew that they were demons. And so I remember thinking, and I heard this voice say, "You're not going to make it. You're not going to make it." And I was looking, and I knew that, and I was afraid in the dream, because in the window, I knew that those were demons that were possessing, that were in those dolls, those stuffed animals, dolls and stuffed animals. I knew they were demons, and this voice was like, "You're not going to make it." And that was what I remember from that dream. So I remember dreams like that. Sometimes it's sin, like, oh no, I did something and now here are the consequences for it. And you wake up and you're like, man, thank God for that. That wasn't real.
Yeah, for real.
But I think I remember stuff like that. I remember things that have more of a demonic nature, even though that's not typically what my nightmares are usually about. But I wanna let's get into what some of the experts say, because I think there's a place for, like, if you think about dreams are about expanding consciousness, right? Like, that's what dreams do. Dreams expand. As a matter of fact, there's a quote that this guy said I thought was really good. This is a clinical psychologist who actually studies dreams. And he said that dreams contain images that are not created with conscious intent. They provide self-portraits of the psychic life process and can be used for the objective insights into the psyche's telos, ultimate purpose, goal, or function. So this guy is saying that what dreams do is dreams have the capacity to, because they're not created with conscious intent, they kind of essentially reveal what's really inside the person and what they're really thinking. It's kind of like the best way that I think to describe how he's describing dreams is that dreams are like a subconscious Freudian slip, you know? You know what a Freudian slip is, right?
They're not ex nihilo. They don't come from nowhere.
Right. But he's saying that, like, dreams are like a Freudian slip. Like, a Freudian slip is when you say something that you really mean this, but you didn't mean to say it, but you slipped up and said it, right? So they call it a Freudian slip. Dreams are sort of like that. They're not something that is created with the conscious intent. They happen within the subconscious, which means he's saying that they provide a level of insight into what's really going on inside the person if you can process those dreams and put them together. So that's how he kind of sees dreams as a general whole. But there's what's
already there kind of coming out while you're sleeping.
Right, but because it's not coming out with conscious intent, you don't have control over how it presents itself. Yeah. Like, you know how when people be like, they say something like, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that," right? And that's not really true. They didn't mean for you to be offended, or they didn't mean to expose what they were thinking, but that was real to what they felt, right? Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks, right?
They might not have meant to say it for it to actually come out. But
but usually when people say that's not what I meant, I didn't mean that. Right, it's like, no, you meant that. You just didn't mean for me to hear it, right? You didn't mean for me to hear the process.
So I got a question real quick though. What determines someone to be an expert in this field? What do they do? How do they become an expert? I think the same way
you and I would be an expert in what we do. You study it.
Okay.
So you study it. You go.
But that's what I mean. Like, how do you study dreams? Like, how do they? Do you know that? Or
sure. I think there's a lot of ways you study them. First and foremost, you study what other people who have studied dreams have said, right? But then there are tons of people who who are neurobiological, work in the neurobiological science field, where they specialize in people going to sleep, putting equipment on them, studying the brain cells and what's happening with the brain waves. So
brain movements, brain waves, and all of that.
And then the people are able to articulate what was happening in their dreams. You know? There you go. Yeah. And I think there's some kind of there's stuff that you can give people that I think helps them remember their dreams a little bit better. So they've been studying this stuff for a long time.
So they haven't created a way yet to be able to see people's dreams.
Not that I'm aware of. Now, if there is, there's probably some AI device right now that can do it, but not that I'm aware of. Okay. But I think what they do is first of all, they focus on what part of the brain is functioning in this dream. Mm-hmm. So if it's a wet dream, right, a sexual dream, then they think, okay, this is the part of the brain that is lighting up during that. When it's a nightmare, oh, it's over here. It's affecting this stuff. And they're measuring all of that. And they talk through it. So I don't know all the process of how people study dreams.
I got you. It's mostly neurological on computers with brain waves and all that
100%.
stuff. Yeah,
and I
watching how
think
the body
people explaining
reacts.
them, right?
Sure.
Because there are some people who have more consistency about their nightmares.
Right.
Like there are people, I know people who have consistently had very troubling demonic nightmares for years. I'm talking about every day type thing, not like every once in a while, right? So those people, they remember so there's a lot of ways you learn about dreams, right? But I think this one guy, Patrick McNamara, he's sort of a specialist in dreams and demonic possession. And he has a couple books out. I actually just bought 2 of his books because I'm curious to see what he says. But here, I want to read to you 2 quotes from him and then just kind of talk about them. So here's what he says. What are nightmares? Like, this is what he would do. If you were to ask him, what are nightmares? This is kind of how he would answer. And this is one of the supposedly top neurobiological scientists who focus specifically on nightmares and also demonic possession. To my knowledge, he's not a believer. I think he's just a psychologist. He's not a believer. But here's what he says. He says REM sleep is crucial for religious consciousness and for human creative capacities and for human cultural evolution. But when it goes off the rails, it's associated with a lot of very serious disorders as well. Everything from depression to isolated sleep paralysis and nightmares in particular. Now, a nightmare is defined by most sleep medicine specialists as simply a scary, terrifying dream that wakes you up. All right. So in its most basic sense, a nightmare is a scary, terrifying dream that wakes you up. So this is an important distinction because many in this field, they distinguish the difference between a nightmare and a bad dream, right? So this is how they distinguish it. And again, I don't know all the rules for all of it, but they distinguish a nightmare and a bad dream primarily by this. Did it wake you up? Like a bad dream to your neurobiological reality wasn't bad enough, wasn't scary enough to wake you up, right? So that would be considered a bad dream to those who study these things. But then there's also nightmares, or when you wake up and you're afraid and you're almost like you're like you said about your wife was actually in the conscience. So in the subconscious, it was terrifying. When you wake up and now you're in a conscious state, you're actually affected, right?
Oh yeah,
there's a physical. You're physically affected, emotionally affected. You feel like it's real. And I mean, we've had those, right? I've had dreams.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I've had dreams where I've woken up and looked at my wife mad at her. Like,
right,
how you really, and then I had to process the reality that, wait, this was just a dream.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
bro, I woke up, I had a dream that I committed adultery with this other woman that I knew. And all the consequences were real as if it happened.
You felt
it. I remember being in the dream like, I can't believe I did this. Like, I never thought I would ever do anything. I remember thinking like, man, I lost. I can't believe I was shocked that I did it because I never thought that would ever. And I woke up and I was like, and I had to check for a second, like, wait a minute. Like, oh man, I realized that was a dream. I was actually excited. I was like praising the Lord. Right. And I don't know why it was that particular individual because I'm not necessarily drawn to that individual, but I just was like, maybe it was just a warning for whatever. But I remember thinking like, wow, this felt like, I felt like all the consequences, all of it was real, right? So anyway, so a nightmare is simply a terrifying dream that wakes you up. All right, so let me continue with what he said. A lot of other sleep medicine specialists say, well, it doesn't need to wake you up. If you have a really terrifying dream, that's a nightmare. And we know that nightmares tend to occur during REM sleep. And we know that lots of kids go through a phase where they have lots of nightmares and then they sort of disappear for most people. But the people who are vulnerable to nightmares have sort of a disinhibited, have a sort of disinhibited form of REM neurobiologies. All right, so what he's saying is most people, children, have nightmares. And this was an interesting point that they made. They said for children, like nightmares are scary, but they don't have the same impact as they do on adults because children don't have enough rational and cognitive ability to understand how the world works. So their nightmares are usually there's something in the closet, there's something under my bed, right? They just, because that's their world. Their world is such where they really, for most part, most children live in a somewhat sheltered, protected world where they have someone who is older than them that cares for them and protects them. And so their world is smaller. They don't have the understanding of the world, so that their dreams are usually, there's a monster in my room. There's someone.
Yeah, somebody's going to hurt me. A monster's going to get me.
That's them. But they said there are people though. There are people who are vulnerable to nightmares. Now, I didn't know this, and we'll talk about this in a second. There's actually a disorder. There is a thing called nightmare disorder, bro. Like I've never heard of it. And I'll tell you in a second what it means. And then we'll talk about demonic possession and how they're connecting it to this. But they say basically that if you have nightmares, you have lots of nightmares, it says you have a sort of disinhibited form of REM neurobiology. It means that in REM, rapid eye movement, when you're sleeping, and that usually happens about 75 minutes after you go to sleep, right? Is when you're just in REM sleep, which just means you're in the deepest sleep. And apparently, if you're one of those people who sleep 8 hours at night or something like that, you go through different stages of deeper sleep. Now, I wake up a couple times a night and got use the bathroom, whatever, so I don't ever hit that deep inception sleep where you in a dream, within a dream, inside the dream, dreaming. Like me, I get that first REM and I got to use the bathroom a couple hours later. But there's a sense where it's saying something is wrong with the neurobiological aspect during REM sleep if you have a lot of nightmares. And he says REM tends to erupt into their waking consciousness a little bit, and they get these dissociative states during the daytime and, unfortunately, nightmares during the night. So this is the crazy what he's saying. When you're vulnerable to nightmares, he says that the REM, whatever was supposed to happen during the REM sleep, it tends to erupt in their waking consciousness. So what your brain is supposed to be doing during REM sleep is actually happening while you're awake, and you develop these dissociative states during the daytime. So you got like dissociative identity disorder, right? Where people are not acting like this, there's like multiple personalities, different things are happening. They're saying that it's because there's a REM disinhibited neurobiology problem. Like they're saying something is wrong with it. Yep, there's a glitch essentially. Matrix. There's a glitch in your REM matrix is essentially what they're saying, right? So I just think, so this is all scientific. We'll get to the sort of spiritual side of it, but he's saying, these dissociative states during the daytime, and unfortunately nightmares happen at night. So he says negative psychological events. This is what they're saying happens. The negative psychological events that torment us and affect our sleep. Some nightmares are so memorable that they color the experience of our lives for years, or in fact, stay with us for a lifetime. Now, when they said that, let me tell you what I thought of. I'll never forget this. And I cannot believe I remember this dream more than any other dream. It makes more sense to me now because of who I am now. When I was about 9 years old, I was living in the hood. I one day just happened to I just grabbed the Bible one day and I started reading the book of Revelation for no reason. We weren't Christians.
9 years old.
9 years old. I think I read enough of the book. I don't know if I read the whole book. I ain't had that discipline, I'm sure, at 9 years old. But I remember being fascinated. That night, I had a dream of essentially the end of the world. And I remember I was a kid in my neighborhood. There were great earthquakes around the world. And there was one right where I lived, and I remember the ground opening up, and I could see lava underneath the ground. It was snowing while it was happening, and there was an angel on this white horse, and there was all this drama going on, all these fighting. And I was talking to the angel, and I asked the angel, am I going to heaven? Am I going to make it? And the angel was like, I don't know. I remember the angle that I was in, the church in front of the church with the ground split open, where I'm talking to this angel on a horse. I remember telling my mom the next day, Ma, I had this dream. And she was like, oh, good. You read the Bible? But that was it. It didn't really do anything. But I remember that dream has had a profound impact on me. And now, as one who's in the Christian tradition, I believe this statement that it colored my experience. I still remember it. And I'm talking about I was 9 years old. That was a long time ago. I still remember it, but it's still there.
Right.
So when I hear this stuff, when people who deal with them, I really feel for how nightmares affect us, because they really are psychological events that torment us, but they're also an aspect within our subconscious that is trying to come out. Something is trying to either warn us or there's something about it that's there. And this is why the other guy was saying that they give objective insights into the psyche's telos, ultimate purpose, goal, or function. So this guy was saying what happens with nightmares is we focus on the pathology of them instead of trying to understand the meaning of them. And so he was saying that there's meaning behind these nightmares. We shouldn't just see them as sort of these random psychotic moments, but what is this trying to communicate? What function does this nightmare serve? Particularly if they're repeated nightmares. And you know what's interesting? I know of people who have said, I remember this one girl talked about having nightmares of being assaulted. She was being assaulted by people. And she kept having this nightmare and couldn't figure out why. And then one day remembered that when she was a kid, that's what happened to her. Mm. And then when she finally started to talk about it and share it with other people and get some help, particularly the time where she was the youngest, the nightmares went away. So there's something to what this guy is saying, that there is a connection between what the nightmares are revealing, what function they serve. They could be a protective nature, like warning us of something, making us remember, but because they're subconscious, they're not created with conscious intent. It's hard to understand why we're having them, except how they make us feel.
There's real I guess they would be considered nightmares. They definitely were at the time. So when I was with my son's mother in my previous marriage, before adultery happened on her end, there was dreams, like continual dreams about it happening. You know, that I had vivid visions of her encountering someone and having altercation, having an adulterous affair. And there was at least, it went on for months before I finally told her. I was like, look, this is happening. And that came out because of an altercation outside of an apartment that involved an adultery. That we were like, yo, that's crazy that popped off. And it made us have a conversation. So I divulged that I had been having these dreams for so long. And sure enough, it was maybe a month or two later when it all came out that she was in an adulterous relationship. So what you're saying about, that kind of warning aspect of these nightmares or these thoughts that are happening subconsciously, it makes you wonder, because at the time I attributed that to the Lord preparing my heart for what was going to happen, because I was able to handle it in a much better state of mind, being somewhat prepared, because I had already felt the feeling of being, so dissed and so betrayed, you know what I mean? Over and over again in these dreams. So much so to the point that I remember one time even threatening her and telling her, listen, if that ever happens, I will so and so and so and so. You know what I'm saying? It was on something like that. And then later on it occurred, and my reactions were very different because the Lord took hold of me by the Spirit of God, and there was a different action. But yeah, I remember those types of dreams, man, those nightmares, and it was in a sense of preparation for what was about to occur. That's how I felt.
Yeah, and I think when you're a believer, so you're not saying this, I want to say this though, and I want to not necessarily prove the point, but I want to talk about this in a few minutes. I think one thing that we have to be careful of, and again, you're not saying this, Strack, is like I don't think there's biblical evidence that we should see our dreams as something that we should rely on, those dreams. Like I know we have dreams and things happen, and it's like, so I would say, yeah, the Lord probably warned you, bro. Like I think when the connection is clear, I think it's safe to make that connection.
Yeah, in retrospect, especially. Yeah,
yeah. I think but I think there's a lot of us that will have these dreams, and people will create doctrines and really do things out of dreams. And let me, so since we're here, let me talk about why I think this is dangerous. And so from a biblical perspective, now we know that the Bible, I use, one of the translations I use primarily is the ESV translation. If you type in the word visions in the ESV, you will find 111 times the word visions is used in 105 verses from Genesis to Revelation. But in the New Testament, the visions outside of the book of Acts, and Acts is not, it's not prescriptive, it's descriptive. Acts is not saying this is how Christians will live. It's describing what happened at the beginning of the early church.
For sure.
And so outside of the book of Acts, here are the verses that you have that mention dreams. I'm going to read each of them. So you have 2 Corinthians 12:1 that mention visions. He says, I must go on boasting, though there is nothing to be gained by it. I will go on to visions and revelations of the Lord. So that's when Paul was describing that he was called up to the third heaven, right? In 2 Corinthians 12:1. You got Colossians 2:18 that mentions visions. It says this, let no one disqualify you, insisting on asceticism and worship of angels, going on in detail about visions, puffed up without reason by his sensuous mind. All right, so here, Paul is using the concept of visions as something to not follow and not do. So Paul says that they are talking about worship of angels, going on in detail about visions, puffed up without reason by his sensuous mind. So here Paul is saying people who are going in detail about visions are puffed up without reason by a sensuous mind. And then you get Revelation 9:17, and it says, and this is how I saw the horses in my vision and those who rode them. Now that's specifically the Apostle John getting a crazy apocalyptic vision from God, from the Lord, to write down so that everyone has some inkling of how things are going to all unfold. All right. You get no category in the New Testament to for any of us to think of visions that we're having as something that we feel like we should hold to, right? In fact, there have been church splits. We know that John, Apostle John, was writing against Gnosticism, right? This special knowledge that was coming from dreams and stuff like that. We have to be careful because the Bible doesn't really talk about it in that way. All right, same thing with the word dreams. If in the ESV translation, there are 112 results in 87 verses. So there are 87 different verses that will use the word dreams 112 times. All right, from Genesis 23 is the first time to Jude 8. All right, in the New Testament, outside of the Gospels, so you got 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the word dream in Matthew 2. And that all has to do with Joseph getting a dream from the Lord saying, take the baby to Egypt, right? And then getting a dream to come back. So you get that happening. Then in Matthew 27:19, it says, besides, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I've suffered much because of him today in a dream. So this is Pilate's wife telling Pilate, do not have anything to do with this dude. Like, I've suffered in a dream because of him. So in other words, I had a bad dream, a nightmare about messing with him. And so she's telling him, don't do that, right? So that's Matthew 27:19. You get Acts 2:17. And in the last days it shall be, God declares, that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. All right, that's there in Acts 2. And then in Jude 8, it says, yet in like manner, these people also, relying on their dreams, defile the flesh, reject authority, and blaspheme the glorious ones. All right, so here Jude, this is the last time it's coming up, is that Jude will say, like, this is they're relying on their dreams, they defile the flesh and reject authority, right? So people will make their dreams authority over actual authority. So I don't think that we have it would be good for believers to take dreams, even if there's something that sometimes manifests themselves as happening, like what you had. Even if they have a degree of prophetic nature, there's a difference between God allowing you to see something in a vision or a dream and then making that something that you should rely on and some doctrinal basis for dreams being the indicative of what's going to happen or what that means. I don't think believers, we just have that. So I think we have to process dreams as whatever, if they're dreams, nightmares, if they connect to something that takes place, or if somehow from that dream we get some type of, it becomes a word of knowledge where we somehow question something and find out a detail that we wouldn't have known had we had that dream, I think we just chalk it up to that.
Yeah,
we chalk it up. I would chalk up a dream that is insightful, that says something, as a word of knowledge, and not this fundamental entity of God now working through dreams. Like, God is going to work primarily through his word. Jesus said in John 17:17, sanctify them by the truth. Your word is truth.
Yeah, I mean, that's the easiest way. I mean, even if you have, people who are continuationists rocking with the idea of, prophecy, visions, whatever, we're still supposed to check that with scripture. We're still supposed
test
to
the
balance,
prophecies, right? Test the spirits.
Right, we balance it with scripture. So in other words, if it's contrary to what we see in scripture, the spirit is not going to contradict himself. So yeah, that's how we balance out everything. We check everything with the authority of scripture. So
Yeah,
that's
I
how
agree
you should
with
handle dreams and nightmares as well, I think.
I agree with that, bro. I think as best as we can, that's what we do.
Right.
And I think so. I'm saying that because I think there's a temptation to want our dreams to be God communicating with us in a certain way.
For sure, yeah.
And let me say, and this isn't in any way, shape, or form to like make anyone feel bad or like to correct anyone, but I think if we're really hoping that God is connecting with us through our dreams, and I think it could be that we really are self-conscious about our relationship with the Lord in general. Like, we have to be careful when God says, the means of grace that he provides are the church, the Spirit is there, obviously, the word. There's certain things that we have, even when it says like how we make decisions about getting counsel, ways, it talks about make decisions with wise counsel, wage war with counsel, right? There's a sense where we're going to other people to say, hey, what are you thinking? Yeah. What do you feel like? What do you think? And I think that's what, but when we're desirous of this kind of relationship with God in our dreams, I think what it more is indicative of is we don't have confidence of a relationship with God apart from those dreams.
Yeah, I think maybe to say a little bit more harder, I think you're saying it in a great pastoral way, but we often desire position. And when it comes to receiving special knowledge or secret knowledge or understanding, if we read through the Old Testament, you see that happen with the prophets continually, and position came with it. Though they didn't want the position oftentimes, because the position usually meant some pretty wild things, like if you ask Jeremiah, you know what I'm saying?
Right,
but the reality was whenever these men received from the Lord says, if the Lord of armies says, there was an authoritative position that they had to maintain to deliver the message, because they were speaking on behalf of God.
100%.
And that's usually what people want when they start to talk, well, God told me, and that kind of thing happens.
And so that's what you mean by position, because in the Old Testament, the people had position. Exactly. Who spoke with that authority in those dreams had a position before God. Yep. Yeah, I do think that. So I think that's a category of people that exists. But I think there's a category of people who are insecure.
Yeah.
I think they're
I agree.
insecure, and I don't think they all want position. I think they're insecure about their relationship with God. They're insecure about their sanctification. They're growing a lot of ways. And so sometimes a dream or something is sort of like, I mean, you've heard people say who grew up in the church, man, I never had like that Apostle Paul moment. Like,
Right.
there's sometimes it's hard for us to believe that God genuinely loves us and we're sons and daughters without all the fancy hoopla stuff.
I got you.
I think there's a sense where, it's one thing to believe. Like, I think believing in Jesus for your salvation is entry level faith. I think because that's the beginning of, but that's not the only thing you have to believe God for, right? So, and I think that's the easiest thing for people to believe, to be honest, even though people reject it. But in all seriousness, like, who doesn't, most people don't want to go to hell. They don't want to get punished. So if I can believe that my sins are forgiven because somehow, cool, I'll believe that. That's actually the easiest thing to believe. What's harder to believe is once you're a Christian and you fail, especially repeatedly in an area or two, it's hard to believe that you're forgiven, that you're still a son or a daughter or whatever. So you have verses like 2 Timothy 2:13. If we are faithless, he remains faithful, for he cannot disown himself. Mm-hmm. I think we're so insecure about our relationship with the Lord. It's why many people will latch on to like-minded folks. So we've talked a lot about like this idea of the theological gospel versus theological. Like, why are all these Christians latching on to political camps and acting like that's the truth? Because I think deep down inside, there's just an insecurity. And your confidence in the Lord is not there. So you're latching on to any people who will who has like-minded views and will accept you and embrace you. There's a sense of being accepted. And I think 1 John 4 says this, perfect love casts out fear. Like, if you are not perfected in love, if there's fear, then you haven't been perfected in love. There's something where I think there's a lot of us who are struggling in our relationship. So we want dreams to be like, oh, God speaks to me, God loves me. It's like when God answers a prayer, sometimes we're emotionally affected. Like, why are you affected? Sometimes it's because, oh, wow, he is real. Like, we know it, but then he actually did this in such a way I'm emotionally affected because he heard me. Because we often think he doesn't hear us. And I think dreams sometimes can be that for people. But I don't think we have a biblical basis to put a lot of stock in our dreams, even if they become something that manifests in the conscious world that's true. I just don't think, I think we should, it is what it is, but our relationship with the Lord is largely going to be us renewing our minds to believe the promises of God in Scripture.
Yeah, and trusting and believing in salvation at the cross alone.
100%.
And continually. I mean, I know you say it's the easiest thing, but it's the thing that we believe in daily. It's the anchor to our faith.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And by the easy, I just mean I think people think I just got to believe in Jesus, but I know people who believe their sins are forgiven that don't believe that God cares enough to help them get a job, though. Yeah, so how do you believe that your sins are forgiven, but you don't trust that God's going to provide you the other things that you need?
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It is kind of hard sometimes, though, I've talked about this recently, like the answered daily prayers connected to or anchored by the ultimate hope that we have in Christ's return. Right. Like this, because the daily prayers are like, he might not, but we hold on to this hope that he will definitely return. Well, I mean, I think the same faith should apply to our daily prayers as well. Right. So yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I see what you're saying.
Let's talk about nightmare disorder, and then we're going to slide into how this, at least a couple people, but particularly this one psychologist who studies dreams and demonic possessions, how he connects the two. But this is what nightmare disorder is. This is a real disorder, bro. Nightmare disorder is a pattern of repeated, frightening, and vivid dreams that affects your quality of life. It ranges from mild to severe and can be short-term or chronic. Nightmare disorder is treatable with various psychotherapies and medications. It commonly affects people with post-traumatic stress disorder. What's interesting about that is that it connects back to what we read earlier about there being a and erupt. Your REM tends to erupt. A disinhibited form of REM neurobiologies, right? It says it tends to erupt in their waking conscious a bit, and they get these dissociative states during the daytime, and unfortunately nightmares during the night. So people who have post-traumatic stress disorder will have some degree of emotion, like cognitive, conscious, emotional challenges, right? Being able to relate to people, not living in the fear all the time. You know, I remember this story. This one time, this guy had gotten back from war, and he had a real difficult time. And he was in a restaurant eating, and someone yelled. What did they yell? They yelled some phrase like, I forgot what they yelled, but it was in his mind. That phrase meant incoming bomb. This dude yelled out something and dove under the table. And people were like, what are you doing, bro? But he had PTSD from spending a couple of years in war, watching people die, watching people just sitting there chilling one day, all of a sudden you're under full-on assault. And in his brain, the amygdala and the hippocampus, they were not able to get rid of the fight or flight syndrome. And when you have PTSD, your cortisol levels don't ever get to a place where they're normalized. So you're kind of living, even though the trauma is gone, you're living in fear of it happening again. And so you can't essentially enjoy when it's not happening because your brain has not allowed you to realize I'm actually safe now. So you develop, that's what the PTSD does. You can't get rid of the fight or flight mode. There's no middle ground for you. And there's a book, The Body Keeps a Score, that I've read and talked about a ton. I'll never forget this. This guy, his name is Bessel van der Kolk. He's a Swedish guy, I think. Top neurobiological surgeon in the world. And book, New York Times bestseller. I don't know how many.
Yeah, I read it as well. Yep, you put me onto it years ago.
Yeah. There was a point in the book where he made this point. And when he said this, I was like, wow, this describes the scene in every hood I've ever been in. And a lot of times where people, and it doesn't have to be black, it's just when you live in communities of trauma, and those are normally going to be communities where people don't have a lot of income. So you can be in Appalachia, you can be in all white communities in Appalachia where they're poor, they don't have a lot. I mean, the statistics are almost identical to the hood in the Chicago or Southeast DC or Philly, North Philly. When you live in a high crime state, he said this, your brain, because it cannot get out of the fight or flight, he said it better than what I'm going to say, but he said basically your brain cannot escape the fight or flight mode. It can't get the cortisol levels normalized. And so because of that, you live in a hyper vigilant state a lot. And even when you're calm, you're waiting for what we would say the shoe to drop. And he says, when you live like that, you cannot have emotionally stable and healthy relational connections with people. You will live in a state of irritation, frustration, and awaiting the next traumatic moment, even when there could be none at all. And when I read that, bro, I thought, I don't know what, and this book wasn't written for anyone. It wasn't trying to justify anyone's behaviors or anything. But when I read that, I remember thinking, you know what? In the hood that I was in, the many different neighborhoods, we never said, I love you, bro. We never hugged each other. We never said we loved each other. None of it. It wasn't until dudes died or something happened where we would let our emotions for that individual come out. But there was an inability to have close relationships because we're all, even with women, you can have sex with them. You might even have children with them. But there was a neurobiological breakdown not to say that no one ever did it, but in those communities, and again, it's not just black, it could be any community in the world. I mean, if you type in the 25 most dangerous cities in the world, the majority of them will not be black. And there'll be 6 in America at most. The rest of them are all over the world. But there is an inability to have sort of stable relational connections because your brain cannot get you out of fight or flight mode. And I thought, wow, so many people I know live in this state of like the possibility of losing your life or just the day something erupting. You just can't do it. And I thought about, this is why all of us would look at each other and be ready to kill each other just because we stared at each other too long. We were in such a traumatic state and a hyper-vigilant state that even looking at me longer than 2 seconds meant war.
I mean, listen, maybe I got PTSD, but that still kind of means war a little bit. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like when somebody's staring at you for a minute, there's still that rising up that happens that you gotta like, you know, smile and say hello to overcome or do something. Look away because that's still there.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, yeah, man. People stare.
Well, I do, bro. I do think, but I think for you and me, part of that is just so I think that's real. I think there's I don't know if it's PTSD in the same way, but I think you and me have both been deeply affected by that. And we've both felt like, even as Christians, that is very much a part of the Adamic identity we still have. Now, everyone doesn't, listen, the Holy Spirit moves in when you get saved, but Adam doesn't move out, right? So it's not necessarily like everyone doesn't have that sort of Adamic nature to them, but you and I do, because that's part of our environment.
Right.
We're used to, and we still, like, even to this day, bro, I haven't been in the hood. I can go to the hood and hang out and chill, but I'm not in it. Even to this day, though, I still like pay attention to where, like, who, if I go into a room, I know where all the exits are. I usually back in if it's a type of thing I back in so I can just pull out. It's just part of who I am, because there were years in my life where I was living in a post-traumatic, cognitive world.
Yeah, there were things that you learned how to do to survive and to function and to be on top. You learned how to do certain things.
I didn't have a lot of nightmares, which is interesting. I didn't. But for people who have nightmare disorder, it commonly affects people with post-traumatic stress disorder. So you have this, your brain isn't functioning right during the day, and then sort of in the cognitive, your brain isn't able through the REM sleep able to because what happens is REM sleep apparently is supposed to heal your brain. It's supposed to heal your brain. That's why it puts your body in psychosis. You sleep, and then it heals your brain. But when you have damage to the amygdala, damage to the prefrontal cortex or the hippocampus, it's hard to do that. And so you live in this...
rest. It's rest for your brain. It's supposed to be.
And your brain is almost not resting.
Right.
All right, so how do we get to... So that's the nightmare disorder, just this sense of... It's a pattern of repeated frightening and vivid dreams that affects your quality of life, ranging from mild to severe and can be short-term or chronic. Nightmare disorder is treatable with various psychotherapy. I'd be curious to know what the psychotherapies and medications are, because if you have nightmare disorder, a lot of medications they help you sleep. Like remember in Nightmare on Elm Street, they was like, I don't want to go to sleep. Right. I'm not trying to go to sleep. Like I don't want to go to sleep. That joint's crazy.
Yeah, man.
Let's talk about nightmares and demonic possession. Yeah, that joint's crazy, right? So the same guy, Patrick McNamara, he makes these observations, and I thought this was interesting. And I'm still thinking about what I think about this, but I'm going to read what he said, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. So he says, there are many examples, but when you look at a series of nightmares over time, one common pattern is that before the series of nightmares begin, a demon appears just in the room. The person has a nightmare and they say, I woke up from the dream and wow, there's this weird demon in my room. But he was just there. He wasn't doing anything. It scared me and I woke up. And then a week later, they'll have a very similar dream with the same demon, and the demon will now be near the bed, no longer in the corner of the room, but near the bed. The third week, I have the nightmare again, and it's a very similar nightmare, and now the demonic agent knows that the dreamer is aware of them, And so the demonic agent ups his game and tries to get closer and closer to the individual having the nightmare. And so the individual starts to put up barriers to protect themselves. And an individual who's particularly vulnerable to nightmares, these barriers will eventually not work. And they need to get clinical help before that happens, because in many cases, the demonic agent is out to possess the individual's consciousness, and the individual will wake up. And he says, if you look at case studies of demonic possession, they invariably occur after a series of nightmares. And then finally, the demonic agent in the nightmare possesses the individual's consciousness, and they wake up in a possessed state. That's a crazy joint.
Yeah.
Now you gotta remember, this guy's not a believer, so he's not talking about necessarily what happens to Christians. He's describing, this is what he's saying, and this is what he studies. In fact, I'll put a link to the YouTube video, but the YouTube video, it says, I studied demonic possession dreams. Here's what we found. Patrick McNamara, right? So this guy is saying, from my clinical, psychological, neurobiological expertise, this is how we see this develop. He's not even calling this a scientific thing. He's saying the demons possess the individual's consciousness, and they wake up in a possessed state. Somehow, the nightmares that they have, the demon gets closer and closer. Now, he says they have to get help, right? He said, what he said? He says they have to get help because the barriers they're putting up won't work. Excuse me. And then eventually the demonic agent will possess the individual's conscious and they wake up. And then you need like exorcism rituals to get rid of the demonic agent. So those are some of the ways in which nightmares teach us about supernatural agents in religious consciousness, and why obviously you do not want to have, why you obviously don't want to have nightmares. However, nightmares have been around, we're almost certain, for many thousands of years. So that's a crazy thought, bro. He's basically saying that through the lens, in his experience, he has a couple books. I was going to buy one up because I was hoping to find more. This is what I try to do. I'll watch a few YouTube videos of a person, and if I feel like I get the gist of what they're saying and get enough of them, I'm not buying their book. But if I feel like what he's saying intrigues me, I want to buy more. So I did buy. He has a couple books out. I did buy the. Well, I don't know why we are. But I did buy this. He has a 2-volume set called. I ordered this today, actually. It's called Spirit, Possession, and Exorcism, History, Psychology, and Neurobiology. He says, it's called Rights to Become Possessed, Rights to Exorcise Demons. There's 2-volume set. I bought them both. Come in a couple of days. I'm interested to see how he processes this because he's not a believer. But he's not denying that this is a fundamental reality in people's lives. He's not denying it. I think that's interesting.
It is interesting, especially when you think about demons having, or any spirits having the ability to interact with you when you're in your subconscious state. Mm-hmm. Like that thought is kind of wild too, because you're not in control of your mental capacities pretty much, right. And yet these things are able to interact with you somehow. It's wild because you would think, like you have a tendency, as at least I would think, to kind of equate dreams or nightmares with the spiritual realm, because they're outside of what we see with our eyes here in the physical. You know, there's a sure, it's something that's happening in your brain, but to think that there is a connection between the spirit realm and something that's just happening in your brain from what this man is saying, if there is some truth to this, where this is where they can channel in and somehow possess you, and then you wake up possessed by a demon, that's kind of wild, man. That is a wild thought if you think about that as a possibility. I mean, of course, we can go back and forth as to whether or not those indwelt with the Holy Spirit can deal with that type of thing. But the reality is that Christians have nightmares too. So, you know, it definitely opens up a serious conversation on, you know, what else do we have to defend against and how, you know.
You know what he didn't say in the video, in which I was speculating on, is why does that happen? Because if that's how demonic possession can happen, and I want to make sure I said, he said this, and again, this is a guy who studies this, right? What's the actual, there's a sentence that he said, and let me see. Horrible dream, and a week later, I have a very similar dream. Where is it? An example. Where did he say it? There was a sentence that he put that made me be like, wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, I don't know, but I'll tell you, while you look for it though, it does remind me of the show From, right? So that show From,
From's crazy.
Yeah, like there's like some type of demonic thing or something happening where these people are getting you at night, these creatures. And then out of nowhere, it goes from them getting you at night to now they can get you in your sleep.
Right. Wow.
You know what I'm saying? Like something happens there. It's kind of wild, you know, art imitating life kind of thing, and vice versa. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I can't find the sentence I was thinking of. In an individual who's particularly vulnerable to nightmares, these bears will work, and they need to get clinical help before that happens, because in many cases, demonic agents out to possess an individual's consciousness. I mean, if you look in the case studies, they invariably will occur after series of nightmares. Yeah, so this is what it is. He says this. If you look at case studies, this is what he's saying as a professional. He says if you look at case studies of demonic possession, they invariably occur after a series of nightmares, and then finally the demonic agent in the nightmare possesses the individual's consciousness, and they wake up in a possessed state.
Right.
So let's think about this from the statement that he's saying. They invariably occur. So he said, if you look at the cases of demonic possession, this guy, based on what I've known of him, he's looked at a ton of cases. So he's not just talking out the side of his neck, right? He's not just watched a video on YouTube and is now commenting. This is a dude who does this and has written books on these things, right? Got a 2-volume set that I ordered, and there's another book on this very thing. I thought, let me get the 2-volume set. He's saying, if you look at the case studies, they invariably occur after a series of nightmares. So you look at the case studies of demonic possession, he's saying this is how they happen. And when you watch movies, sometimes that's how it happens too. These people have these dreams all of a sudden. Here's what's interesting to me, to go with your point about if that's how demons are able to possess, and in the case studies that this guy has looked at, that's how it happens. Then what is it about nightmares that are the strategy of the devil to be able to possess people? Because if nightmares are the entry point to demonic possession, based on what he's saying about case studies, then what are the strategies then? Like how, I'm trying to think about what is it about nightmares? What is it about because you're already in a psychosis state when you're sleeping. Your brain does that. Your eyes are the only things typically moving. I mean, obviously, there are people who move around and stuff like that. I'm not saying you're just like a stoic, like you don't move. But there's a sense where your brain is not allowing your body to respond to what's happening in the nightmare. You'd be moving, you know, or except when you jump and you wake up, especially when it's like something scaring you, wake up suddenly, right? That's what happens. Or you wake up with the urge to pee like I do, right? One or the other, something's going to happen. But there's a sense of like, what is it about nightmares? What is it about trauma, right? PTSD. What is it about trauma, about nightmares that gives the devil a foothold in the life of at least, we know, non-believers? That's the thing that I really wish he expounded on, that maybe he does in the book. But to me, the only connection that I'm able to make thus far is fear. Somehow, when you're afraid of the devil, and the reason why I'm saying this is because you got James 4 and 1 Peter 5. They both say resist the devil. James 4 says resist the devil, firm in your faith, right? First Peter 5 says, resist the devil and he will flee from you, right? So there's a sense where I think fear, Hebrews 2, Jesus, 14 through 18, Jesus came to remove the fear of death that the devil had over people.
That's right.
Right?
That was his power over people. Was the fear
yeah,
of
right.
death.
I mean, death is going to be one of the entities thrown into the lake of burning fire, right?
Right, right.
It's the last thing, I think. Death is the last thing thrown in, as a matter of fact.
Oh, death, where is your sting?
Yeah, it's death is the last entity thrown into the lake of fire before it's all said and done. So I think there's something about being afraid, and this is where I used to love watching like scary movies, like those supernatural movies that were. But now I'm realizing, though, the intent of those movies is to give the supernatural cosmic powers of evil a lot of authority and power, and it makes you afraid of them. They're almost more powerful than God because you never see God seemingly able to stop them. So these movies create a level of fear, and it's through fear, right? Because what is trauma? Trauma is an event that happened to a person that they're afraid of happening again, right? So even with I was talking about with the body keeps the score and the hypervigilance, the flight or flight that's perpetual, what you're hyper vigilant against is the fear of this traumatic moment happening again.
Right.
So if you live in a hood, people could just die. You could be you ever driven through the hood? You've seen this because you're from that, and you see just teddy bears and stuff, flowers wrapped around a tree on a location.
For sure.
That is where some kid died.
Yep.
Some kid got killed there, and other kids in the neighborhood, other people, they put teddy bears, a little cross, some roses, in memory of that person who died right there. And so when you grow up in an environment like that, where you just have lost a few friends you develop a certain fear of that happening, and then that develops a sort of anger and aggression to prevent it from happening, right? So you get to looking at dudes like, man, what you looking at me for? All of a sudden you in that mode. There's something about fear that the enemy uses, and that's an entry point. And I think scary movies make you more afraid of him, and you're less afraid to fight and resist. And when you cultivate that fear in the conscience, that fear somehow shows up in the subconscious realm. And those become nightmares, and those nightmares add to the fear. So then you wake up afraid of what happened in the subconscious, but you're also afraid in the conscious. Somehow a demonic entity is able to use that. So there's something about not being afraid, right? Fearing the Lord, but not the enemy, that I think is what believers are supposed to do and have.
Yeah. I mean, this ties into a lot of our like discussions lately when you're talking about authority in the spirit realm and Satan, and you know what authority are we giving and to whom and how we're handling it. Because if we open ourselves up in a way, like let's say we purchase a Ouija board, you know, or we start watching this type of wicked, evil things, we're kind of, like you're saying, we're introducing into our psyche the authority of these spirits, these evil things that have abilities, powers, principalities. We're introducing into our psyche how powerful and mighty they are.
Yeah.
And then we now have to mentally deal with them. Mm-hmm. And if we're Christians, great. We're also being introduced to the might of the Lord, so we have something to combat it with. If we're not Christians,
right,
then all we have is the authority of that realm,
right,
constantly being poured onto us, and that gets super crazy.
It's crazy.
That's I mean, that's where we're at. The Christians have a hard time with that. So imagine, not being fed the supremacy of the Lord, his sovereignty, his might, or reading in scripture like at the end of Kings, where Ahab's prophets are sent a lying spirit, stuff, encounters like that. Like if we're not reading those kind of things and acknowledging that the Lord is sovereign and ruler over even the spirit realm, then we will only have the authority of these evil, wicked things. Yeah. And that's the greatest lie Satan has, is that he is that roaring lion going around seeking whom he can devour. Right. If we see that there is no lion master, you know what I'm saying?
Right, yeah. Yeah. So you got a comment. I don't think I'm believing that's how people get possessed. from Narv the third, Narv 3. Yeah, cool. I appreciate that. I don't know what your expertise is. You put up Ephesians 6:10-20. I'm hit, but that doesn't talk about how people get possessed. It just says we do not wrestle with flesh and blood. So it's not that's not a passage that describes how demon possession works. It's just letting us know that it's like the spiritual warfare.
That's
so,
real.
Yeah, I don't think that the guy is saying that's the only way people get possessed, and that's not what we're saying. But we're taking his expertise. And I don't know what your expertise is, Narv, so this isn't a pushback to you. But on one level, let me challenge that perspective a little bit. On one level, like, what authority do you have to say that happens? Because your passage is not the passage for that. So that's just how you feel. This is a guy we're looking at his expertise and him saying this is a way he sees this happening. There's a connection there. Of course, that's not the only way that it happens for people. But the subject of the show and the subject of the YouTube video was nightmares and demonic possession, not nightmares, the only way people are possessed. So, but I'm in agreement that Ephesians 6:10 for believers is that. But I think when it's like, well, I don't believe that I'm not thinking I'm convinced. Cool, you don't have to be. But I think in this day and age, we have a death of expertise. Like, we think because we don't believe it that it's not valid. And it's like, I think he's more, I don't know your expertise. If you present it, then I would love to hear it. But if you don't, I'm going to trust his perspective over yours only because he has credibility from his study. But I don't think it's the only way. And we're also not talking about believers. So we're talking about just the reality. We know Ephesians 6:10. We got plenty of passages. I mean, he alluded to 1 Kings 19, right? God's sovereign authority over the divine council. And that scene was not just the ones on God's side. That was all of them have to appear before God, right? So again, I just think we have to be careful when we're talking about this stuff. I think none of us really know how any of this works. And Ephesians 6:10-12, which is an amazing passage of scripture, is not explaining how demonic possession works. So again, we're just trying to figure out how do we process this stuff. And in the category of dreams and nightmares and possessions, this is what he studied, and here's his conclusions. And we're commenting on his professional opinion which really, in terms of studying, he knows more than us from a clinical perspective. He's not talking about that all people are that way. So I think this is a crazy topic, man. I think it's one of those topics where it's just like, wow, how do we handle this? And but I think the best thing to do is, Ephesians 6, I think there is what's interesting about Ephesians 6? The only time the Spirit is used in that passage is on the sword of the Spirit, right? That's a crazy thought. And let's go a step further. When Jesus, after having the Spirit descend on him in the form of a dove in Matthew 3, after being baptized by John the Baptist, the Spirit leads him into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil, right? So here Jesus is tempted by the tempter, like the big dog, general against general, right? And when he's tempted by Satan, even though he's filled with the Spirit, right? He resists Satan by simply quoting scripture.
Yep.
2 verses from Deuteronomy 8, 1 from Deuteronomy 6. He didn't do any superpower, razzle dazzle, none of that. He didn't do none of that, So I just feel like there is a degree in which the Holy Spirit is in us, but it doesn't do a lot of supernatural stuff to get. Jesus didn't do no Avengers type powers, like, pew, 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 blasting Satan back. It was just like, do not put the Lord your God to the test, Worship the Lord your God alone and him only. Boom. It was just that. And so when you get to Ephesians 6, and you get later down in the verses, I think it's verse 16 or 17, it talks about the sword of the Spirit. None of that stuff is supernatural in itself. I mean, it is, right? Because it is supernatural weaponry, but it's not like superpower in the sense that we like to think of it, right? It's not like the gifts of the Spirit, like word of knowledge, speaking in tongue prophecy. It was just, man, good old fashioned word. So that's what I love about Ephesians 6:10-12. It does help us through that. But but there are going to be challenges, man. There are going to be challenges where you think you're just going to quote the passage to a demon. That demon is not impressed. When I casted out 5 demons out of this girl, that joint, we was back and forth. It wasn't like as soon as I said, even if you look at Mark 9, right? Luke 17, the transfiguration. When Jesus comes down the mountain, this is Jesus. This dude just glowed up, right? He comes down the mountain. He sees everyone. He sees a boy who's possessed by a demon. And the demon, when seeing Jesus, he doesn't say, "What have you come to do with the Son of God?" The demon throws him on the ground and starts convulsing and all that stuff. And so Jesus has a conversation with his dad. How long has this been happening? So even in the presence of Jesus, that demon wasn't like the legion who ran up, got on his knees and said, "Are you come to destroy the Son of God?" That demon was a powerful demon, so much so that when he cast it out, that joint shook violently for a minute and then left the boy almost seemingly dead. And then his disciples said, "Why couldn't we cast it out?" And he said, "Some things come by prayer and fasting."
Right.
So like that demon even was a powerful demon enough to be in front of Jesus and still throw the boy down and all that. And shake violently before coming out. It wasn't like it just came out. So this stuff is no joke, man. We got the scriptures, but we gotta have faith too. And when these things come our way, but that's why I think we should rely on the word and not dreams and stuff like that. Like, oh man, your power is not, or even in the gifts of the Spirit. If you're one of those continuationists or charismatics that believe in the gift of the Spirit, that they still exist, which I personally do. I don't call myself a continuationist or charismatic but I don't have any credible reason to believe that apart from people just don't like the way people manifest them. There's no biblical passage that says the gifts will cease when the Bible is formed into canon. I don't know where that comes from. I think there's an abuse of the gifts, and people are more reacting to an abuse of the gifts, but you don't have a credible theological. And I've looked at they're not credible. They're speculative and they're preferential because people be wilding with the gifts. But to say that I don't see them ceasing. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So any last thoughts for you, Strack, on nightmares?
Nah, this was good.
Here's a couple tips. 2 tips that the experts say which if you have nightmares, they say this: try to confront what is terrifying you in the nightmares. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know how you'll do that. I can remember one clear time. No, not one, more than one. I knew this was a nightmare, and I was bucking back in that joint. I was bucking back. I was able to run faster, do all this stuff, jump over people. It was like I had superpowers. It was just like Dream Warriors, right? Mm-hmm. Even though they didn't do it right, but I was bucking back. And they say, so confront what is terrifying you in the dream, if possible. And they say, bring that feared situation into waking life. So I guess if you're able to remember and articulate that, bring that into the waking life, in the conscious life, and put that out there. If you're a believer, share with other believers, to pray, acknowledge it to God, and ask God for help. I think that's it. But I think ultimately, though, I think to go back to that Ephesians 6, man, I think we got to be focused. Like, remember your salvation, the breastplate of righteousness, like protect that morality, right?
That's right.
The belt of truth, like the belt holds up the most sensitive parts of your body. You want to have truth, like hold you up, the feet ready to with the gospel. You want to be able to, the boldness to talk, the sword of the Spirit, like using the word in an offensive way. Swords aren't only defensive. Shields are defensive weapon. Swords are for offense. So I just think a lot of us, we just be weak, man. We be weak with it. We just not serious about those things, what we would typically call spiritual disciplines, praying and fasting. Like I to my shame, man, I neglected fasting the vast majority of my Christian life. I've been a pastor 15 years and I've neglected it until largely this year. I've been more into it this year than I ever have. And it's not because of no dreams or not, just feeling like I need to add that as a functioning component, and a shame that I haven't added that to it. But I think a lot of our way we process things is just too preferential, like things that I'm comfortable with, and we just assume that and I just think I think some of us aren't prayed up enough. We're We're not, you know, personally, I'd rather watch a couple of hours of Netflix than pray for an hour or two. It's just easier to do that. It's more entertaining for me. And I think a lot of us are in that place where we're just weaker than we give ourselves credit for. So we can be susceptible to things that we shouldn't be because we're not as diligent. So I think there's something to be, so I think that Ephesians 6:10 is spot on. We should read that process. What are the practical implications that begin in verse 13? All right. What are the practical implications as you start listening to those things? So, all right, lastly, for those of y'all that don't know, y'all got to get a shout out to the Wolverine birthday joint. You know what I'm saying? You know, make sure y'all listen. Let me tell you the best birthday gift you can get strapped right now.
Tell them.
Here's the best gift. Support your boy some of y'all, I know y'all listen, y'all will spend $12, $15 at Starbucks in more than that in a week, right? On iTunes right now, or wherever you get your digital music from, there's a project out right now by his hype man Strack, right? Get that project. Pump that joint, listen to it, tell others about it. It's only going to cost you a few dollars, but what you get from it is more than that, because music has an intrinsic way that it affects our soul. It affects us, and sometimes we'll hear a song that we haven't heard in 20 years and be singing that joint as soon as we hear it, because it does something to us. Yes, he's my friend, he's my brother, and I'm a fan of his music, so I'm biased, but I think his music will do something to you. I think it has the potential, especially if you like rap. But I would say if you don't, just support our brother, man. This is about just support. We're the underdogs. Support the underdogs. Support the underdogs. Go get that album. It's a crazy joint. You'll love it. It's on iTunes. And it's everywhere, right? Amazon, all the places,
everywhere.
right?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm gonna put a link in the description so that you have it. This album is his hype man Strack and Apologist, right?
Yep, correct.
Yeah.
The Art of Hearing.
The Art of Hearing. I got it. Let me show you this. Let me just show you real quick. This is what it looks like. Right there. The Art of Hearing. Right there. Shazam. His hype man Strack and the Apologist. Get that. Support your boy for his birthday. Look out for him, man. We don't ask nothing from y'all. And even when we do, y'all still don't do it. But this one, do this one. All right. Appreciate y'all, man. Good to be back on the show. We ain't missing no weeks. If we do, we'll let you know. We back in there, all right? Appreciate y'all riding with us. I'm Kirk Kennedy. He's Strack the Wolverine.
Come on already.
We're out of here, y'all. Grace and peace.
Peace.
Boom. I should go out with a song, but YouTube might block it. You know how